In the autumn of 1596, a Spanish treasure ship wrecked on the coast of Japan, and her pilot said one sentence to the men interrogating him. The sentence, as it was reported, and remember that phrase, went like this. First, the King of Spain sends his priests. Then he sends his soldiers. That is how he conquers the world. Within months, 26 people were dying on crosses on a hill above Nagasaki. Within 20 years, an entire religion was a capital crime, and it stayed one for 2.5 centuries, while an entire nation was all but sealed away from the planet. And the story ends. It genuinely ends. Beneath an atomic bomb, detonating in the sky above a cathedral. All of it traces back to that one sentence. Unless, of course, the pilot never said it. Rewind 53 years. Autumn 1543. A storm-battered Chinese junk washes up on Tanegashima, a small island off the southern tip of Japan. On board, among 100 or so Chinese sailors, are a handful of men no one in Japan has ever seen before. Portuguese traders, the first Europeans to reach the country. And here's the fun part. We have Japan's first written review of Europeans, and it is not flattering. A Japanese chronicle, set down a few decades later, but it is the record we have, delivers the verdict. They eat with their fingers instead of chopsticks. They cannot understand written characters. They show their feelings without any self-control. That is the actual documented list. To the Japanese, these visitors from the world's self-declared civilizing power were illiterate men with bad table manners who cried in public. They filed them under an existing word, Nanban, Southern Barbarians. But the barbarians brought something. 2 matchlock guns. The local lord bought them for a fortune, handed one to his swordsmith, and said, in effect, make me more. Within 6 years, a warlord was ordering 500. Within 32 years, roughly 3,000 Japanese gunners were shattering samurai cavalry at the Battle of Nagashino, and Japan had become one of the largest gun producers on Earth. Remember that, because it tells you what kind of country Europe had just stumbled into. This was not a place that got conquered. This was a place that took your best idea and mass-produced it. 6 years after the guns, the second import arrived. August 1549, a Basque priest named Francis Xavier stepped ashore at Kagoshima, carrying a religion. And here the reviews reverse beautifully. The Japanese had called the Europeans barbarians. Xavier wrote home that the Japanese were the best people yet discovered, and that he would never find their equal among any nation, 2 civilizations squinting at each other. One says barbarians, the other says the finest people on earth. Both would live to regret the enthusiasm. Xavier learned Japan's rules the hard way. He arrived in rags, preaching holy poverty, and was ignored. Without the language, he wrote, we go about like mute statues. So he ran the experiment again, this time in silk, styled as an ambassador, bearing a striking clock, spectacles, a mirror, a 3-barreled musket. The local lord was delighted, granted him a disused temple, and 500 converts followed. Lesson learned. In Japan, the message needed packaging. The Jesuits who followed him packaged brilliantly. 6,000 converts in the 1550s, 30,000 by the 60s, 100,000 by the late 70s. By 1600, roughly 300,000, 1 or 2 people in every 100 in Japan. The counts come from the Jesuits' own letters, so hold them loosely. But the scale is real, and down in the southern island of Kyushu, whole domains were baptized nearly wholesale. Why so fast? Here is the engine, and it is not spiritual. China had banned direct trade with Japan. The Portuguese sailed the gap. Chinese silk in, Japanese silver out, on an annual black ship that made its host port rich. And missionaries and the merchants traveled together. If a lord wanted the ship, he welcomed the priests. One lord, Omura Sumatada, went further than anyone. He converted. He mass-baptized some 60,000 of his own subjects, many by force. Buddhist temples burned across his domain, and in 1580, He handed the Jesuits an entire port town, in perpetuity. On paper, Sumitada remained its lord. In practice, the Jesuits appointed its magistrates. They ran its courts. They collected its port revenues. The town was called Nagasaki. Sit with that. A Catholic religious order was administering a city on Japanese soil. And in the capital, the man busy unifying all of Japan under one fist had started reading reports about this foreign faith. Temples burning, provinces baptized on command, a fortified port run by priests. And one question kept surfacing in those reports. The question that decides everything that follows. When the converts kneel, who exactly are they obeying? The man reading the reports was Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Remember him. He's about to become this story's villain. And the uncomfortable part is that from where he sat, he was being perfectly rational. Hideyoshi had spent his life ending a century of civil war. He had watched armed Buddhist monasteries defy warlords for decades. He knew what an organized faith could do to a fragile state. And now he had a new one, growing at compound interest, whose leadership answered to a foreign king and a foreign pope, whose converts burned shrines, and whose priests ran a port. In the summer of 1587, fresh from conquering Kyushu, he struck the Bataran Edict. Bataran, from the Portuguese word padre, declared Japan the land of the gods and ordered every missionary out within 20 days. And then, in the same document, it added, the trade ships are a different matter. Merchants may come and go freely. Read that again. Ban the religion. Keep the receipts. A draft memorandum even accused the Portuguese network of buying Japanese people and selling them abroad as slaves. A real grievance, though it was quietly dropped from the final edict, perhaps because Hideyoshi's own armies would soon be selling Korean prisoners to the very same buyers. Nobody in this story stays clean. And then almost nothing happened. No missionary actually left. They changed clothes, went quiet, and kept working. And Hideyoshi let them because the silk trade could not function without Jesuit interpreters, and he knew it. He confiscated Nagasaki for himself, which may have been the point all along. For 9 years, the edict just sat there, a loaded gun on the table. Then came the ship, October 1596. The San Felipe, a Manila galleon bound for Mexico, is mauled by typhoons and runs aground on the island of Shikoku, her hold stuffed with cargo worth a fortune. The figures run to 1,000,000 pesos. Her timing could not have been worse. Hideyoshi was drowning in the costs of his war in Korea, and 1 month earlier, an earthquake had flattened his brand new castle. He was a ruler in desperate need of money, and the sea had just delivered him a treasure ship. His commissioner traveled down to interrogate the crew. And this, supposedly, is where the pilot produced a map of the Spanish Empire, gestured at its impossible size, and explained how it was done. Missionaries first, to soften a country from within. Soldiers after. Hideyoshi heard the report and exploded. That is the story that went around the world. Now watch it wobble. Every account of that boast comes from Jesuits or Franciscans. Rival orders locked in a blame war over what happened next, each swearing the other had provoked it. No Japanese record confirms the speech. And one Spanish friar who is actually aboard the San Felipe wrote that Hideyoshi had decided to seize the cargo before the pilot was ever questioned. Before. Maybe a frightened sailor really did brag about empire to the wrong audience. But Hideyoshi did not need a boast. He needed the money, and he already had a 9-year-old edict to justify taking it. The boast just gave the confiscation a story, and gave history one of its most durable legends. Which is why I said, in the first minute, as it was reported, it did not matter whether he said it. Someone was going to pay either way. The order went out, round up the Christians of the capital region. The first list reportedly ran to about 170 names. It was cut to 24. And here's the detail that should stop you cold. The sweep was meant to target only the Franciscans, the order openly defying the ban. But the officials also grabbed 3 Japanese members of the Jesuits, men who were never supposed to be on the list. Among them, a preacher named Paul Miki. They were condemned by clerical error, and the machine did not care. The sentence, as first written, ordered noses and ears cut off. A senior official softened it, the left ear only. That mercy was carried out on 24 people in January 1597, including 3 altar boys, aged 12, 13, and 14. Then they were loaded into ox carts and paraded through the streets of Kyoto, bleeding as a public advertisement. This is what the foreign faith buys you. And then Hideyoshi did something calculated. He did not execute them in the capital. He sentenced them to die in Nagasaki, the Christian city, and made them walk there 600 miles. In January, dawn to dusk through the coldest weeks of winter, wounds untreated, displayed in every town along the road. Somewhere on that march, the 14-year-old Thomas Kozaki wrote a letter to his mother. His father was walking in the same column, condemned beside him. The letter survives. He told her not to grieve, and that he would be waiting for her in heaven. No screenwriter gets to invent anything better than what is simply documented here. 2 more joined along the way. One man was arrested for the crime of bringing the prisoners comfort, and a Kyoto carpenter, the accounts say, refused to leave the condemned and was added to the list. 24 were sentenced. 26 arrived. February 5th, 1597, a hill called Nishizaka, overlooking Nagasaki harbor. 26 crosses lay ready, and Japanese crosses were not Roman ones. No nails. Ropes, iron rings, a peg to sit astride, a bar under the feet. Each cross had been built in advance, fitted to its occupant, which means someone had measured the 12-year-old. His name was Louis Ibaraki. The official supervising the execution looked at him and hesitated. He offered the boy a way out. Renounce the faith, live, come serve as his page. The eyewitness accounts, written by missionaries, men with every reason to polish the scene. So take the shine with a grain of salt. Record the boy asking whether he could remain a Christian. Told no, he refused, trading a life that never ends for one that ends soon, he reportedly said, was a poor bargain. Then he asked the executioners a question, "Which cross is mine?" And he ran to the smallest one. They raised all 26 and dropped them into pre-dug holes in a long row facing the sea. And from his cross, Paul Miki, the Jesuit who was never supposed to be there, began to preach. He was the mission's most celebrated Japanese preacher, and his executioners had just handed him the largest pulpit of his life. He declared that he was Japanese, that his only crime was teaching the doctrine of Christ, and, as the Jesuit accounts record it, that he forgave the men killing him, and hoped his blood would fall on his countrymen like fruitful rain. Then the executioners moved down the row, 2 to a cross, and finished it with spears. It was over within the hour. Hideyoshi's calculation was simple. Make the deaths public, theatrical, terrifying, and the faith dies of fear. Here is what actually happened. Christians crept up the hill for months, collecting relics while soldiers guarded the bodies. The story of the boy who ran to his cross crossed the ocean and electrified Europe. Conversions did not stop. The community kept growing toward its peak of 300,000. Public martyrdom, it turns out, is recruitment. Every execution was a poster. Hideyoshi died the next year, and for a moment, the pressure lifted. But the men who inherited Japan studied that hill and drew the chilling lesson from its failure. Killing believers makes martyrs, and martyrs make more believers. So the next regime asked a colder question. What if, instead of killing the faith's bodies, you could make the faith unmake itself? They would spend 40 years engineering the answer. In 1614, the new Tokugawa, dynasty founded by Ieyasu, banned Christianity outright. Not just the missionaries this time, the religion itself. Everywhere, for everyone. All 300,000 believers. Churches were demolished. Japan's most famous Christian lord was deported to Manila, where he died within weeks. Every missionary was ordered onto ships and out. Dozens stayed and went underground instead. So the shogun built a machine to hunt them. One of the most methodical machines in history. Its signature was a small bronze plaque, a fumi-e, a trampling image, a relief of Christ, or of Mary and her child. Once a year, starting in Nagasaki in 1629, every man, woman, and child in the Christian regions was summoned before officials, checked against a register, and ordered to do one thing: step on it. Think about what that footstep costs. If you believe the plaque under your bare foot is the face of God, and one step is the betrayal your friends accepted crosses rather than commit. If you refuse, you have just identified yourself and your family to the state. And the genius of it is the schedule. Not one test, once, in a single moment of courage. Every year, every January, forever. Your whole life, the plaque comes back and you must step again or die. Officials carried the images house to house so the sick could trample in bed. The early ones, paper and wood, literally wore out underfoot. The government switched to cast bronze. The plaques that survive today are worn smooth, the face of Christ polished away by 2 centuries of footsteps. For those who would not step, there was the pit, a gallows over a hole, the victim bound tight and hung head down into darkness, boards sealed at the waist. A small cut was opened at the temple. Not cruelty, engineering. It relieved the pressure so you would not die quickly. And one hand was left unbound, so that at any moment, with a single gesture, you could surrender. Some lasted days. One woman is said to have lasted 13. In 1633, the machine caught its greatest prize. Cristóvão Ferreira, head of the entire underground mission, a Jesuit with more than 20 years in Japan. He hung in the pit for about 5 hours. Then he signaled. The mission's own commander trampled the image, took a Japanese name, and spent the rest of his life working for the Inquisition, sitting across the table from captured priests he had once commanded, urging them to fall as he fell. If that sounds familiar, it is because it became the novel and the film Silence. The shogunate publicized his fall relentlessly. Of course it did. A dead martyr inspires. A broken commander corrodes. Then, in December 1637, everything detonated. In Shimabara, a starving, brutally overtaxed peninsula that happened to be full of persecuted Christians, a tax revolt caught fire and became a holy war. The rebels, peasants, fishermen, and masterless samurai raised crosses on their banners and rallied around a 16-year-old boy cast as a heaven-sent deliverer, Amakusa Shiro. Tens of thousands of them, women and children included, fortified an abandoned castle. The shogunate massed 125,000 troops. And when the assaults failed, it sent for help. And here is one of history's bleakest ironies. It asked the Dutch, Protestant Holland, mortal enemy of Catholic Spain and Portugal, kept a trading post in Japan and understood exactly what was being tested. A Dutch ship anchored off the castle and fired more than 400 cannon rounds at starving Christian peasants, Protestants shelling Catholics, to protect a trade contract. The bombardment achieved little, and it ended only when the rebels sent out a taunt. Had Japan run out of brave soldiers? That it needed foreigners against so small a force? The insulted samurai dismissed the Dutch and simply starved the castle. When it fell in April 1638, virtually everyone inside was killed. Most estimates say around 37,000 dead. The boy's head went up on a pike in Nagasaki. And then, a twist nobody expects. The shogunate investigated the local lord whose taxes had lit the fuse, convicted him of misrule, and beheaded him too, denying him even the dignity of ritual suicide. The machine executed both sides. After Shimabara, the doors closed. Portuguese ships were banned forever, on pain of death. And when the Portuguese colony of Macau, whose economy ran on the Japan trade, sent an unarmed embassy in 1640 to plead for reconsideration, the shogun answered plainly. 61 of the 74 men aboard were beheaded. Their ship was burned in front of the survivors, and exactly 13 were spared, handpicked as capable of delivering a coherent report home. The warning that accompanied the execution said, in effect, while the sun warms the earth, let no Christian be so bold as to enter Japan, though it were the King of Spain in person, or the very God of the Christians, he shall pay for it with his head. The Dutch, who had passed their loyalty test at Shimabara, were penned onto a tiny artificial island in Nagasaki harbor and allowed to stay. Everyone else was gone. One honest footnote, because the closed country of legend was never quite real. 4 guarded gates stayed open. Dutch and Chinese ships at Nagasaki, Korea, the Ryukyus, the Ainu North, and the lockdown was as much about the shogun monopolizing trade and keeping rival lords poor as it was about God. But Christianity was the reason written on the door. A new Inquisitor General, reportedly a former Christian himself, gave the machine its final upgrade: fewer executions, more psychology, comfortable cells, patient persuasion, a written manual for dismantling belief, because the state had finally learned that corpses were recruiting posters and apostates were poison. Decade after decade, the registers came back clean. Every foot stepped, every village certified. By the end of the century, the shogunate could declare that Christianity in Japan was extinct. It was not. What the inquisitors never saw was this: some of the feet that stepped on the bronze every January went home and prayed. What those families built in absolute secrecy is one of the great survival stories of any religion. They are called the Kakur Kirishitan, the hidden Christians. They lasted 250 years, 7 generations, without a single priest, church, Bible, or written word, because writing anything down was suicide. How? With an org chart. Each secret village had officers. One man, the calendar keeper, memorized the liturgical year so that Easter could never be lost. One was the waterman, who performed baptisms, because baptism happens to be the one sacrament Catholic law allows any layperson to perform. That single loophole is the crack through which an entire faith crawled across 2.5 centuries. Another officer was known simply as the ears. No records, no names on paper. Everything passed mouth to mouth, parent to child, in the dark. The camouflage went deeper still. Their prayers, called orasho, were chanted in rhythms that mimicked Buddhist sutras, so an eavesdropper heard nothing unusual. Scraps of Latin and Old Portuguese, handed down phonetically for so long that eventually no one alive knew what the words meant. They were praying in sounds, because the sounds themselves had become the faith. And on the family altar, in plain sight, stood a statue of Kannon, the Buddhist goddess of mercy, a serene mother in white porcelain. Look closer. In certain houses, and there is a cross hidden in the base. To the inspector, Buddhist piety. To the family, Maria. Meanwhile, above ground, Japan's entire connection to the West had shrunk to a keyhole. Dejima, the fan-shaped artificial island in Nagasaki harbor where the Dutch were kept. A few acres, a bridge, a gate, and at any given time, maybe 10 or 15 Dutchmen, forbidden to leave without permission. For 2 centuries, that speck was Europe. Through it trickled a ship or two a year, and thousands of Western books on medicine and astronomy. Everything except the one thing the whole arrangement existed to keep out. They even had a countdown. Tradition tells of a Japanese catechist named Bastian, tortured and martyred in the 1650s, who left the hidden villages a prophecy. After 7 generations, a black ship would come carrying confessors, and the faith could breathe again. It is legend, not verified history, but the villages genuinely passed it down, generation to generation, like a fuse burning across 2 centuries. Count 7 generations from Bastian's death, and you land in the 1860s. Hold that thought, because the black ships came. In 1854, American gunboats forced Japan open, and the treaty ports were eventually allowed churches, for foreigners only. In 1865, a French priest named Petitjean finished a small chapel in Nagasaki, dedicated, of all things, to the 26 martyrs of 1597. Curious locals wandered in to gawk. On March 17th, a group of about 15 villagers arrived from Urakami, a farming valley just north of the city. A woman in her 50s knelt beside the foreign priest and whispered, as Petitjean recorded it, The hearts of all of us here are the same as yours." Then she asked him, "Where is the statue of Santa Maria?" 250 years, 7 generations of stepping on the bronze in January and whispering the real thing at home. And the first words out of hiding were a password of the heart and a request to see Mary. In the years that followed, hidden Christians surfaced across the whole Nagasaki region, some 30,000 of them, emerging to ask the foreign priests one anxious question. After all this time, does our faith still count? If this were a movie, it would end there. History had one more knife. Christianity was still illegal, and the new Meiji government, the modern, enlightened, westernizing one, answered the discovery with one last persecution. Around 3,400 Urakami villagers were torn from their valley and exiled across Japan. Families deliberately split apart. More than 600 died. The survivors, with devastating understatement, called it simply the journey. Only in 1873, after Western governments confronted Japan's diplomats with the scandal, was the ban finally lifted. 259 years after it began, the exiles walked home to Urakami, and they decided to build something. Not everyone returned to the church. Some hidden villages, offered real priests at last, said no. Their logic was heartbreakingly sound. The hidden practice was the faith their ancestors died for. The garbled prayers were the prayers. Correcting them now, to satisfy Rome, felt like the final betrayal. Those communities kept their secret religion out in the open, and scholars today describe it as effectively a separate faith, one now quietly going extinct, having survived the shoguns but not modernity. The Urakami exiles chose Rome, and they built. Beginning in 1895, farming families gave their money and their hands to raise a brick cathedral in their valley. It took 30 years. When the twin bell towers were completed in 1925, it was the largest church in East Asia. It stood for 20 years. August 9, 1945, an American bomber carried the second atomic bomb toward its primary target, the city of Kokura. Kokura was hidden under haze and smoke. The plane turned to its secondary target, Nagasaki. Cloud covered the aiming point there, too. Through a brief gap, the crew dropped visually, well over a kilometer off the mark. The bomb detonated at 2 minutes past 11 in the morning, above the Urakami Valley, about 500 meters from the cathedral. Inside, 2 priests were hearing confessions. The Feast of the Assumption was 6 days away. The priests died instantly, along with the parishioners kneeling with them, several dozen people. Of the roughly 12,000 Catholics of Urakami, around 8,500 were killed that day. The community that had outlasted Hideyoshi, the Tokugawa, the Pit, the Bronze, and the Exile, was erased in 1 second by a bomb from a mostly Christian nation, diverted twice by clouds, onto the one valley in Japan where the faith had never died. That October, in the rubble, a Japanese soldier, who was also a monk, found the head of the cathedral's wooden statue of Mary. Her eyes were burned to hollow sockets. She sits in a chapel in the rebuilt cathedral today. One of the 2 bells was dug out intact. It rang again on Christmas Eve, 1945. It has rung ever since. 3.5 centuries earlier, a shipwrecked pilot supposedly told Japan that after the priests would come the soldiers and the fire and the conquest. Japan believed him and spent 250 years making sure it could never happen. The fire came anyway, not as an invasion, as an accident of clouds, and the people standing under it were the ones who had been praying in the dark the whole time. If stories like this are your kind of thing, the strange human machinery behind history's biggest turns, subscribing genuinely helps us keep making them, and I will leave you with the question this whole story circles. It is a cold January morning. The official is watching. Your neighbors are watching. The bronze plaque is on the ground in front of you. Step and go home to your family. Refuse and everything ends. Which would you do? Be honest. I will be reading the answers.